All right. Welcome everybody back to the Yeti's Den. My guest today, a fellow UMass Amherst alum and a fellow Delta Chi, Justin Thompson.
How are we doing? Good to see you, brother.
Great to see you as well.
You haven't changed a bit, and it's been how many years? 15 now since I graduated. So it's been a minute.
Yeah. And oh, that's my potential spam. All right, yeah, I've been getting those spam calls. That's hey, one bipartisan issue is the attorney generals of all the states were working together to actually crack down on spam calls because it's unfortunate some people have actually given money away to something they thought was legitimate and then they've lost like thousands of dollars. So
I'm nervous
there,
for all the grandmas out there who fall victim to that.
yeah, and we got to crack down on that. So it shows you that bipartisanship is still alive.
Yeah, if
Well,
you find the right issue for sure.
definitely. So, politics. It's a fun topic. I love it, but it can also be very divisive, and some people can have a very difficult time talking about it. But I think the way to talk about it is, we the world has a lot of problems. Like, what are the best ways to solve those problems? I think that's the best way to really start any discussion that's related to politics. But I'm very interested. How old were you when you got into politics? Like when you started following anything related to politics, and what attracted you to it?
Yeah, well, I'll back up for a second and just react to what you said about, having the dialogue. It's important. You're right. What you described sounds to me like the Mr. Rogers approach, look for the helpers. Because like politics and government, politics um, is the noise. But un underneath that is government and stuff that impacts, the global economy and people's everyday lives. Um, but all politics is local, as Tip O'Neill famously said. And that's how I got my interest, or that's how my interest was piqued when I was in probably middle school, actually, middle school or early high school. So I grew up in Haverhill, Mass, it's a border town, and my father lived in a town called Brentwood, which is next to Exeter, which is inland from Portsmouth. But anyways, in the 2004 election, so I would have been 16. Um, the President Bush was running for re-election, and John against John Kerry, senator from Massachusetts. And so one of the great privileges of being a New Hampshire, I wasn't a New Hampshire resident, but my father was. Being a New Hampshire resident is you have so much access to all of these candidates coming through, and the coterie of people who accompany them. And I was years later, I was talking to a friend, Josh Davidson, who was another UMass alum. He works in, I think it's, let's call it campaign intelligence right now, selling software. But he met his wife, a Smithy. She was I'm sorry, no, a Moho. She was a Mount Holyoke alum, in the college Republicans there. Uh, but he, so he's lived it and breathed it for a very long time. He and I were catching up um, during one presidential cycle. And standing outside his campaign office, he said, these New Hampshire voters don't realize how good they have it. If they want to talk to the president, if they want to talk to the next president or any of the, dozen senators and governors and congress people running for office and primarying here in New Hampshire, they can go ask them any question they want, and they'll get some form of an answer. And so I enjoyed that kind of unfettered access. So met Bush, met Kerry, went to the town halls. A couple cycles later, called did phone calls for John McCain, which is when I really started caring in earnest about campaigns and elections. And so then I volunteered on his campaign, met another good friend, UMass friend, Derek Khanna, who was a Pike, by the way. He would go on to go to law school and work for Scott Brown for a time, and now I think he works for some industry group that advocates for crypto regulation. So that's another interesting thing about the long and winding road of government politics. Like you need to mind your P's and Q's because you never know who you're going to need a favor from or who's going to call a favor from you in the future.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You said you met both Bush and Kerry. It was at like separate campaign events, or
Oh yeah, gosh, there were so many. We were we saw Howard Dean at some uh, rally. Just I want to say it was days before his infamous Yeehaw moment, which ended his campaign. Which is funny to think now that just a moment of kind of unbridled enthusiasm is enough to completely derail a presidential campaign. And he came out, if memory serves, with there's usually a bump when you announce. But if I remember correctly, like his polling was consistently good and improving. But that just kind of rubbed the wrong way with the electorate. That was that. So yeah, we enjoyed that access I just described. If you wanted to go up and shake hands with President Bush, it was at a farm. It was a rally at a farm, and the motorcade came in, and Secret Service let him out, and there he was, and there I was, got a handshake. Um, and same with John McCain. At one rally in Exeter. I sat on the stage. They said we need young people, and they grabbed me and they said, "Would you sit on stage behind the senator?" I said, "Absolutely, why not?" It was actually in that moment, standing behind him, that I listened to what he had to say, and I said, "This is the guy for me." At least that campaign. So. Yeah, lots of really great opportunities. I'm in my husband's office, which doesn't have any pictures, but downstairs in my office. I have some photos from with McCain, with Mitt Romney, and others. There's been a lot over the years, so it's fun. It's you don't actually like know these people, but it's cool to put them on your Hall of Fame.
yeah, yeah. I remember in 2004 because I grew up in a very democratic family. Like I feel like a lot of college kids, not all of them, but a lot of college kids, when they first get to college, they have the same views that their like parents or guardians have had.
Mhm.
And then
That's
I
exactly
was,
correct. That's the biggest predictor of a person's politics is what their parents is.
yeah. And my mom and dad actually in 1990, I was 1 years old. My grandparents came and babysat me, and then my parents went to John Kerry's reelection party after he got reelected to the Senate after serving one term. And
Nice.
then in 1996, they were actually at a wedding that was being officiated by Weld. And then
Yeah.
they actually had to leave the after party a little early, and they kind of were awkwardly saying we're actually going over to John Kerry's reelection rally because Weld was challenging Kerry in
Oh wow.
'96. Yeah, and then I remember in 2000 being really upset about the whole disaster down in Florida because I really felt like Al Gore was the real winner, and I remember my parents really wanted Gore to win, so I wanted Gore to win. And then in 2004, I was in eighth grade, I got really into U.S. history. Like I had a teacher who really got me into it, and therefore, since I got really into history, I got even more involved in politics and studying past politicians and reading up on present politicians. And I remember the Iraq War was the number one issue.
It was a big one. Now that we're so deep into the 21st century, the aughts feels like it was a really long time ago. And, social media hadn't quite proliferated the way that it has. There was still, much more, um, less commercial platforms, like Facebook and whatnot. So people weren't really using them to organize on a large way as they do today. I remember having a hard time figuring out what a hashtag is. There's actually a UMass professor, it was Dr. Teemison, who actually now teaches at Endicott just up the road from me. Um, and she made a hashtag for the class, and we had to post on Twitter. And so I remember downloading Twitter as per the requirement for the class. And she said, okay, it's hashtag, poli sci 402. And I'm like, I don't know what a hashtag is. And she had to like explain step by step like I was a child. But anyways, I talk about the digital stuff because in like when the Iraq war was raging and we were approaching the election of Barack Obama, the atmosphere around political activity was a little more, um, dare I say, homey, because people still flyered. You had to flyer to get your word out on campus. There were still like burnt out hippies in church basements in Cambridge, like holding meetings on nuclear proliferation and wearing their bucket hats and their making their signs and like going out. It was much more communal. But and obviously a lot of that's changed in the teens. Um, but the foment and the activity in those years, the Bush to Obama years, was really really intense because it was and people are protesting now as they should, and that's great. But the true blue like yeoman's work of political activism was still a very manual, in person, roll up your sleeves activity. And I think we've lost a little bit of that, and I wish we had it still. So, but you got to work with the tools you have.
Yeah. So, did you start out at UMass as a poli sci major?
No, actually, I was originally a classics major.
Ah,
And I really got tired of Lex. I took Latin for 4 years in high school. I had a really great, influential teacher, Mr. White. He was a retired Catholic priest. He had left the clergy and was our our Latin and philosophy teacher. And he made a really big impression on me. And so I decided that's what I want to do. And then studying it for a fifth year with the professors were fine, but less, inspiring professors. I said, you know what, actually, really, I enjoyed Mr. White as a teacher. I didn't enjoy the subject matter as much as I thought. So then I switched to archaeology. And then I realized that, you can't exactly be Indiana Jones. It's excavating those temples in the jungle are a multi-generational project. And but I had always been, as I said, from the Bush Kerry election onwards, intrigued by politics, and so started taking some poli sci classes, started volunteering for more campaigns, and then that's when it stuck, and that kind of atmosphere, like I can still smell like the flyers like mildewing on the walls of the student union, and just eons of students going through, stapling their flyers, spilling coffee, smoking weed. Like it's there was kind of a charge, an energy that you could feel. And Thompson Hall, where the poli sci department was, had that too. There was always a hustle and bustle of people like going to some meeting to do something and make some change. And the beautiful thing about that time was too, and it's funny when I say at that time, it makes it sound like I'm talking about the 60s, but this is literally 15 years ago, which is not long. And but uh, you know, we could. the great thing about college at that, and I hope it's still the same. My impression is it's not. But like we talked about Emily, the president of the U Dems, like we could have a beer and get along just fine, and we did. Like we went to parties together, but we could have respectful disagreements over politics, and it wasn't. It's kind of like the famous Bush Clinton debate in 1992. Who is going to treat immigrants the most hospitably? Clinton said, "I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to welcome them in this way," and the opponent said, "No, I'm going to do even better than you." Like they were debating who's going to be more charitable than the other. Now it's a toxic absolutist take. But the gray area was where we would debate the actual policy issues, not the culture war, not the there was no, or maybe if there was, it was to a lesser degree. Like we weren't trying to one up or get a gotcha moment on anybody.
Yeah, and which leads me to the classes at UMass. So I was a history major, and I remember freshman year I signed up for the Politics Today Rap, which was up in Webster on the fifth floor up on Orchard
Mm-hmm.
Hill. And that was actually a great time to be in the Politics Today Rap because that's right when the 2008 election
Yep.
was going on. And I had a special. We had a class like our floor Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we were at first we were going over to Grayson, but then we got moved over. We had it like in the like basically in the lounge, in the like the
Mm-hmm.
first floor lounge of Webster. And I
Okay.
actually became really after the course, like I had I'd run into my instructor. He wasn't a full professor yet. He was in the process of becoming a professor. Nick Archer. Remember
Okay.
Nick?
I know the
You know
name.
Nick Archer?
I'd have to Google him, but I that name is very familiar to me.
Yeah, he and I actually become really good friends. Like we'd run into each other at Franklin and like have discussions, and then we would like talk on like Facebook and stuff. And then in like 2013, I commented on one of his posts, and then he messaged me, and then we had a lot of messaging back and forth. And so he's actually appeared on my podcast twice now.
Oh,
He's
good.
yeah, he's a poli sci professor down at Middlesex College in New Jersey. It's a community college down there.
Okay,
And
great. Good for him.
yeah, and a lot of like I remember a lot of us were, you know, there's a saying like if you're not a liberal when you're 18, you don't have a heart, but if you're not a conservative when you're 45, you don't have a brain. So like a lot of us were liberals. There were a few like you know more conservative kids. Like it was actually we there was a it was we had a one credit like rap course, and I know the like I was in the regular side, and then the Commonwealth College kids were on the other side of the floor, and then there were actually some more hardcore conservatives on the Commonwealth College side of the floor, and then I remember there was one girl though on my floor though who was like had more conservative views, but she voted for Obama because she just trusted Obama more than McCain,
Hmm.
and that's another thing about politics. They say 50% of it is how you present yourself. Like you,
Yeah,
and I mean
absolutely. I mean,
Obama came off as like this. At least in 2008 and really throughout his presidency as like a guy who he knew how to revolutionize people. Like he knew how to fire people up.
absolutely.
And
His way of connecting and communicating, we'd never seen anything like that before. Um,
yeah,
and McCain, for all of his virtues, it was a stark contrast. He looked like more of the same. And to your point, like the first time the country really it dawned on Americans that presentation matters is the Kennedy Nixon debates. If Nixon would just dab his upper lip and didn't look like a sweaty mess, because the public, through polling research showed that the majority of Americans shared Nixon's policies. The same with McCain, and you'll have to fact check me after this, but there was a headline in, I want to say it was Time, that showed um, uh, the best way to summarize it is to use the title of the article, and it said, Obama has the hearts, McCain has the minds. So the majority of Americans shared McCain's views on issues, but the majority of Americans also liked and felt more empathetic towards, or I don't know what the emotion is, but they had a positive reaction to Obama, aesthetically.
Yeah, and it's interesting too how, like, I remember when McCain got the nomination, like a lot of Democrats were like, well, I'm glad he's the nominee because he's actually not as bad as Bush, because they meant that like Bush was really conservative, whereas McCain was only moderately conservative. And like, it's keep in mind, it's also it's crazy to think about. McCain was actually very pro immigration, and when he said pro immigration, like not only bringing more people in, but also those who are undocumented. Like he was in favor of giving them a legal pathway to amnesty and citizenship. And that's actually the one area where Bush was actually more liberal on. I remember in 2006, my mom, like this was in the Bush's second term, and all the Democrats were calling Bush a war criminal. Like this is before the surge in Iraq. Like Iraq was really going badly.
Mm-hmm.
And but I remember my mom going, George W. Bush is liberal on one issue. He supports giving amnesty to undocumented immigrants. And there was a bill too, McCain, Kennedy, and a lot of big names, Hillary Clinton, John
Mm-hmm.
Kerry. It was really not really a Democrat versus Republican. It was really a lot of big states senators versus the smaller state senators. Like a lot of the smaller states were against it because they felt like people in their states would lose jobs. And then I remember, which isn't, that can be disputed. But then I remember in fall 2008, I had sociology with Dan Clausen.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it was called Race, Gender, and Ethnicity. And then the final unit was all about immigration. And I remember Professor Clausen saying, I thought this was going to be a major presidential topic during this cycle, but it ended up, being a back burner. And so it's like, I actually remember watching the movie La Misma Luna, Under the
Okay.
Same Moon. And I was like, I made the argument that we should let people who want to be here, if they're working, as long as they're not a violent criminal, like it's best for both the country and for really our world and for humanity. I mean, because the thing is, like, if you deport someone, you're ripping apart families, and you could be sending them back to a very dangerous place where their life is at risk. And like, everyone's talking about how bad ICE has gotten. Like, it's important to remember back in 2007, 2008, there was INS used to like raid farms and stuff where immigrants
Mm-hmm.
were doing work that most Americans don't want to do. And I felt like that was an unnecessary use of taxpayer money. I don't think it was, raiding a farm where immigrants aren't harming anybody. They're actually they're producing, they're part of the economy. I thought that was a waste of resources. I thought it was a violation of human rights. So I wrote all about that in my sociology paper.
Good.
And
Good.
it's like, I feel like and then in 2013, there was the Gang of Eight, where we had 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans in the Senate who supported a bipartisan immigration package. And that actually passed the Senate 68-32. But then the John Boehner-led House, never put it up to vote. It's, in hindsight, I really think, looking back at 2006 through 2008, Bush even said in his exit interview, he said 2 things. The first one is the liberals seized upon it as him not being presidential. He was like, they asked him if he had any regrets from his presidency. The first one, he was like, well, I guess it would be the WMD, the fact that it didn't work. Like, I mean, that was kind of like a Bushism right there. Like I remember
Yeah.
my mom, who was anti-Bush. My grandparents who lived in Amherst, my grandparents were super liberals, and my grandmother being like, "Huh," like we're all kind of like laughing, like, "What is he talking about?" But then he interjected, like Laura started talking, and then Bush interjected. He's like, "Oh, an immigration reform. Like I wish we had gotten that passed." But in hindsight, if we had gotten immigration reform passed, like a big amnesty package, similar to what Reagan signed into law in 1986, like I feel, don't
Hmm.
you feel like Trump wouldn't have been able to seize that issue in 2015 and wouldn't lead to the rampant nativism that we first saw in 2015 and that's even expanded to today?
That's an interesting question, and I would like to think that if we were able to kind of recommit ourselves, as you said, building on if you attach something to Reagan, then as a conservative, then you are kind of helping to cement it and give it credibility, because every conservative since he left office has been trying to be the heir to his legacy. And Bush, obviously, with his father being the vice president, was successful in some programs in doing so. Clean air being one of them, and obviously pursuing um, immigration reform. But unfortunately, I think the Tea Party and the rise of the internet, and all of the social ills that come with social media. Um, the Cambridge Analytica scandal being the perfect encapsulation of how it can go so wrong. Um, I think has turned a lot of conventional wisdom on its head. So in a normal, healthy society, I would say, yeah, absolutely, it would have withstood a Trump presidency. But had it passed, and I in this reality, no, um, it because nothing's sacred anymore. I mean, we literally, we saw what happened yesterday in Minneapolis. A woman was shot in the head um, for protesting, and then we're being told by the leaders of our government not to believe what you see on TV. And even if we are all suffering from mass psychosis, independent experts analyzing those videos at trusted legacy media like NPR and Associated Press and Reuters have all come out to the same conclusion that she was trying to get away and that officer was in no harm. So if we're in a place in politics where we choose the side of a murderer, then nothing's sacred. We're smashing international norms. Gosh, we're raising taxes via tariffs on middle class Americans. Like these used to be sacred cows of Reagan republicanism. So it doesn't. It's really whatever the whim whams are of the president and or his advisors. And I'm going to pivot now because we've ramped right up to today. So I apologize for derailing us or skipping the timeline. But
Well, it's like a show, like sometimes in a show, like it start like generally there's a general trajectory, but then sometimes like the beginning of the show they have like this new scene that actually takes place like before the events of the show started, or like in between
yeah,
um
snap
the
cut
first and
and
second episode. And yeah,
yeah, we're jump. We just did a time warp.
yeah.
Um, but so time warp to 2020, and we have COVID is raging. Um, we or 2021 really. We have the president's been impeached twice now. COVID is raging. The center of his we got no infrastructure week, which should have been easy
Well,
because that's a bipartisan issue.
we had like 40 infrastructure weeks, but then nothing ever came of them.
No bill ever came out of it. It was, and especially for someone who wants to build big, beautiful things, to not be able to accomplish that. And then the centerpiece of his first um, term was his tax bill. And the tax bill accomplished very little. Even if you blame the pandemic, um, banks reduced lending after getting billions of dollars in tax benefits, which is a huge. So not only were we draining the coffers, but then the anticipated outcome of subsidizing them is that they would lend more. And then that didn't happen, which exacerbated the issues that we saw in COVID. So it was a really lackluster presidency. And then it flamed out spectacularly with the insurrection on January 6th. So I rehash all that because there was a moment, and I think we'll all remember this moment after January 6th, where we all agreed that we can't ever go here again. And then, of course, the slow drumbeat of his rallies, and he ended up running again and he won. But there were so many people who were fired or embarrassed by the president in his first term. I mean, pretty much every cabinet member was insulted in some fashion. Your Boltons, your Tillersons, General Kelly. It was just a massively dysfunctional place. So when you have that, who's left? And then someone like me, who was a never Trumper Republican in 2016, we may not be, there may not be many of us, or maybe you could call us today the Lincoln Project Republicans. I'm actually no longer a member of the party. I left, and we can talk about that later if you want. But so you have this very, while as a portion of the electorate, we're not huge, but as a percentage of kind of the republic, the politico intelligentsia, it's actually a significant tranche of people who work in elections and in government, and in public affairs consultancy, and so we play it. We're an outsized percentage of that universe of people, and if that universe of people doesn't want anything to do with your administration, and if your first administration doesn't want anything to do with you, even your own vice president, then who is left? What ghouls are lurking in the shadows to come out and work for you? Especially a guy who's known to not read his own memos, who just drones on and shoots to the hip. If you are a bad actor, this is the perfect opportunity for you to weasel your way in to the halls of power and let loose a spectacularly fucked up agenda that serves you and your equally scary, ghoulish friends. And we can see it right now. The crypto bros have invaded the White House. They are sucking the Treasury dry. And we've got Stephen Miller, who is a cartoonish caricature of a villain, talking about American imperialism 2.0, and openly espousing Zionism, American exceptionalism, and villainizing people who come from the Southern Hemisphere. It's it's a wild time. I say it all because there's no goodwill to be expected from this administration. The monsters have been let loose. So, I'm saying, and to bring it full circle, that's why I don't think anything sacred from the Reagan years, the Bush years, can survive this presidency. Doesn't matter what it is. They'll turn it upside down.
Right. And well, talking about some old school politics, and then I want to get into state level politics. The deficit and the debt
Mhm.
has always been a big issue. But and like if you look at it, like throughout our history, we've actually been running deficits for most years, not as high as they are like in the as they've been in the past like 25 years, but um, in the last time we actually had a budget. Well, first off, we had a budget surplus like toward the correct me, it was in the 60s. I believe it was after LBJ had been elected to a full term in 64. Like it was like in the 67, 68, we had a budget surplus, and then
Mhm.
Reagan actually ran up
Mhm.
the deficit. I mean, once again, he was a big military spender.
Mhm.
And then Clinton, the budget wasn't balanced again until Bill Clinton. And he had,
Mhm.
once again, the marginal tax rates were actually much higher, like during from 1945 all the way until 1981. Reagan really, the slashing of the marginal taxes is what's led to a lot of less revenue coming into the federal government. Clinton was able to raise the top marginal tax rate to 39.6%. And I mean, he actually did, from my analysis, he did actually have an actual surplus. I mean,
Mhm.
some people say, oh no, it was like, he's counting Social Security and stuff, but no, he actually did have a surplus because some of it went to pay down the debt. And I was just reading it was like a memory on social media that was shared, like 25 at the end of 2000. Bill Clinton had a chart. He's like, if we follow this path, we'll have no more debt by the end of 2010. And
Mhm.
then George W. Bush ran up the deficit again. Like once again, 9/11 and the dot-com bubble played a role, but Bush really exploded the deficit. And then Cheney at the time during those 8 years said deficits don't matter. And then Obama comes into office, and he actually, I remember Obama was criticized for the debt throughout his presidency, but he did lower the deficit each year. So, like,
Mhm.
yes, the debt, it was 10 trillion when he took over, and it was up to 15 trillion by the time he started his second term, but the deficit was going down. So it's like, if the deficit, it's Republicans would have an argument if the deficit had gone up during his term, but since the
Mhm.
deficit went down, they basically, it could be seen as he's lowering the debt burden, even though the debt's really bad. And then he actually lowered it was down to 500 billion or 600 billion deficit by the time he left office.
Mhm.
It went from 1.3 trillion deficit when he took over down to about 500 billion. And then once again, Trump shot it up, and then Biden brought it back down, and then now Trump's shooting it back up again. So it's really the Republican presidential administrations that are exploding the deficit, and therefore I think could be blamed more for the debt than the Democratic presidential administrations. What do you think?
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, in modern history, those charts don't lie. Um, and the one thing, I think with Reagan, however, he did course correct on taxes um, partway through his administration. He raised taxes more than a dozen times, after coming into office. But I do think that one thing we have to remember with the 80s is that he met the times. He won. He was a extremely popular president. So he had his mandate was a hell of a lot stronger than our current presidents to execute on some form of austerity and tax relief. So I do think that it's hard to criticize him for the for deficit spending, especially when he was trying to deal the Soviet Union their death blow. So he really, I think that every president is going to be measured in some. And I think in some, there's you take the good with the bad. There's a lot of positives from Reagan, meeting the moment in the 80s. Um, so and that was pre-globalization. The world was such a wildly different place in that time. We were still fighting the Cold War, and we didn't have an internet, not really. Um, One of the hallmarks of his presidency, I think, was banking reform. Um, there's good and bad with that, right? Now all of a sudden banks have much more sophisticated products they can sell, but at the same time, Americans all of a sudden had access to way more capital and the ability to borrow than they had before. Now, obviously, there's two sides to that coin. That's risky, and then you can get in recessions when people start defaulting on that debt. So there's two sides to those coins. But anyways, my point with that is, I would really, and it's not because Reagan is so sacred to me, but I do think the world has changed so radically with the digital revolution and the globalization and the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's really like kind of like a BC AD demarcation in my mind for politics. But no, your point is completely valid, that Republicans do have this nasty habit of talking big on tax relief and being smart with spending, and yet all running up huge deficits. Now, I agree with Dick Cheney to a certain degree because we've globalized, as I just mentioned. There is so much money moving around this world that there is a line we can't cross. I mean, some fancy economists can probably tell you a number, but there will be a time where we print one too many dollars, and all of a sudden it starts having economic impacts, and we start the scales tip towards hyperinflation. So there is some line we shouldn't cross. We know it's out there, and we don't want to get close to it. As I think people are kind of just sticking their finger up in the wind, saying, you know what, 15 trillion feels like too much. So I think that the national debt and deficits scare people, and they have a hard time articulating why. So I think we should just get back to the Massachusetts model and have a constitutional amendment that says you can't deficit spend. We bond a lot of money, right? Or I'm sorry, you have to have a balanced budget. It would take us a long time to get there at the federal level. I don't know if that's even anything's possible, but it's quite a nut to crack. But as you know, in Massachusetts, we have a balanced budget requirement, and the administration and finance, along with the Ways and Means committees, get together with the Department of Revenue and the state treasurer, and they say, "This is how much money we expect to have next year." All right, it's $65 billion with revenues and federal rebates. So let's write a budget based on that. And then not as much came in, or we're running out. We got to pass a mini budget. So be it. But we only spend what we have, and we can bond, and borrowing is great. So sometimes you got to build something big, and you got to whip out the state credit card, but that's totally fine. And in fact, it's good. It's good to take on some debt, because
Right.
it's Massachusetts. There's a study done by it's a conservative think tank, as far as Massachusetts think tanks go. The Pioneer Institute did a study a number of years ago that found that the capital projects that are spent with borrowed money generate the most economic activity. So the bond debt is a good thing, and it gives the bond salespeople something to do.
Yeah, and then it also improves our credit score when we pay it off.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to establish that history. So, the point is taken. Republicans talk big talk, but they, in recent history, again, as you said, there's extenuating circumstances, there's extraordinary circumstances. Everyone agreed to go into Afghanistan. Iraq was a hard turn that we didn't see coming. So obviously and we're going to be paying that off long after I'm dead, probably.
Yeah, I had my AP American History teacher. It was spring 2007, and we went all the way up to to through the 1980s. And I remember like him teaching us about what Ronald Reagan was doing and the mass spending. And someone in the class was like, "How did we pay for all this?" And he's like, "We're still paying for it." And
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, but it had if we didn't do that, a lot of people will think that the Soviet Union was going to crumble anyways. Uh, but I think it's only because of the actions that we have been taking. The policy of containment, and unfortunately, the arms race played a big part in that too. Um, would and there are clandestine actions, funding the Mujahideen and funding a proxy war in Afghanistan. So, but that cost a shitload of money too. So,
right. And it brings me to Mitt Romney when he got elected governor in 2002. Like looking back on his actions, like he balanced the budget, so like he deserves some credit for that. But I remember in 2012, one of the reasons why I was opposing Romney. Not only did I really like Obama, but Romney cut like funding to education and public education. So, like
mhm,
if a town gets a lot of funding, like they not only do they need the funding to maintain the school, but to build additions to the school if they get more students, public teacher salaries, but also like reading specialists, like the paraprofessionals, and like for special ed students, and then for students who fall behind, like you need those reading specialists. And
mhm,
since Romney cut the education budget, like a lot of those reading specialists got laid off, so that wasn't good for students. But
mhm,
on the other side of that, he did raise like the licensing fees, like only like modestly, and that helped pay down the deficit that he was facing when he came in. But
mhm,
then he also closed some corporate tax loopholes, which
mhm.
brought in a lot more revenue from the corporations. So like I feel like if he had perhaps if he had ran as more of a moderate businessman in the 2012 election, I think one of the key problems with his campaign is he tried to run as someone to try to lock down that like Tea Party base, and that's what alienated not only like the hardcore liberals but also like the middle ground people. Do you think, like looking back on the campaign, do you think if Romney had kind of ran the way he composed himself as a senator from Utah, he was the first person to vote to convict the president of the same party when he voted to convict
Yeah.
Trump after the in 2019 after the Trump Zelensky phone call was
Mhm.
made public. Like, do you think if he had ran more like that in 2012, like he might have had a better shot?
It was a closer race than I think a lot of people expected. Um, but I don't think it would have mattered enough. So actually, to your point, like maybe it would have been more palatable for his conscience to not run so conservative to win the nomination. The Republican nomination is a cesspool. Like you really have to out crazy the crazy nowadays. And so I think he would probably prefer personally to have run a more moderate campaign, knowing it wouldn't have mattered. Um, because a book he a profile on him was written last year. I can't remember the name of the book. Oh, Romney, a Reckoning. It's called A Reckoning.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
heard about that book.
it's great. It's a great book, and in it, this that is analyzed, and he, um, uh, in a series of interviews, talks about how he has kind of a set of governance principles, and any decision he makes, he wants to make sure that it can pass like these tests to make sure it conforms to what he's promised and what kind of guides him. And obviously, you can you can read the lines. It's like, yeah, I'm kind of like bending my rules here and there to make some of my positions fit. But also some of it was, the time and the place and the information he had available. So he affords himself some caveats. Um, but it's you. I'm glad you brought up his principled stances now. They've always been there. I think he's always been that guy. I think he's had to pander a little bit, and no one likes to pander. Um, but his vote to impeach is excellent. His marching with Black Lives Matter, excellent. Like the guy, he's a stand-up guy. He may not be um, you know, your favorite flavor of vanilla. Because let's face it, he's not the most exciting candidate. But that's what you get with a no fuss Mormon businessman, right?
Yeah.
But I wish we had more Romneys. And he had was the Wall Street Journal or Forbes or the Washington Post. He has an op-ed that came out a couple weeks ago where I think the headline was, "You need to be taxing people like me more.
Yeah.
We need to close the loopholes." I think you shared it with me. Did you share it
Yep.
with me? Yeah.
Yeah. I
Thank you
sent
for
you a
sharing
message and I was like,
that.
look,
Yeah,
and
it's
I
great.
said to my family, I'm in a family chat that we actually have a lot of politics updates in that chat. And I said, if Romney had done this like 15 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I think he probably he did it 20 years ago. As you said, when he was governor. He closed those loopholes. I think he's always believed that. And I think that's always been a popular message is we need to close corporate loopholes. Because they really are getting away with not paying what is owed and the offshoring of your finances. It's bad enough to offshore your operations and your manufacturing. It's another thing to offshore your actual books, because that's a double whammy to the American economy. And the final thing I'll say on Mitt, is that beside him being a stand-up guy, and he would have been an excellent president, and he is a great principled senator, is because we have a balanced budget in Massachusetts, it does stink when you only have so much and you have to make those cuts. And yeah, it is a bit of a proxy for what they value. Um, but we saw that with Deval Patrick when his the uh, during the all through the recession. He had to he had to dip into the rainy day fund to fund core services. And there's a lot of stuff that people were giving him hell for. They said, how could you be making cuts to the NAMI program um, or the HELAP program and this and that, and like everything. When everything is a priority, nothing's a priority, right? So I don't envy the position of leaders who have X resources and X plus mouths to feed. But that's unsatisfying to everybody.
Yeah. So in 2016, I remember the CNN article, the CNN headline early on January 2015. Romney ruled out a 2016 run. Who's your ideal GOP candidate besides Trump in 2016?
Oh, for president? Well,
Yeah.
it would have been actually none. No, no, no,
Mm.
no one. If it wasn't Mitt Romney, if it wasn't one of the moderate Republicans that are out there now, in 2016, um, Charlie Baker was still in his first term as governor. If I wish he would have run in 2020 or 2024, but he had repeatedly said that he has the job he's always wanted as governor. So that's too bad. But also some of those guys, your Larry Hogan's and your Chris Christie's. Well, Chris Christie's a big ball of wax. But you know, people of that ilk, I think, um, are just too good, or of people, to survive a Republican primary. And Mitt walked that line very well, as I said earlier. But it still cost him a little bit. Unfortunately, 2016, um, I I think I wrote in my now husband, for president. Um, and then
Nice.
yeah, so he got two votes. I think his father voted for him too. um, but
All right.
And that brings me to why I left the party. It was 2 years ago. I was watching the now hollowed out, morally bankrupt CBS Evening News, controlled by the Goebbels of this administration, Barry Weiss, and that I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name. The former ambassador who ran. Um, shoot, uh, why can't the UN ambassador, the Trump's first UN ambassador?
Oh, Nikki Haley.
Thank you. I don't know why I was having a complete brain fart there. So Nikki Haley, who was supposedly, running against Trump, and then later, sidled up next to him. She glopped onto the culture wars, and she said that, she correctly pointed out that, um, teenage and young women are, their rates of suicide among that demographic are growing at an alarming rate. Um,
Or because of
and
social media and back in the 90s or even the 2000s, if you didn't get invited to a party, you might have heard about it word of mouth, but if you see your friends all having a good time and you're not on social media and you weren't invited, that or also how women have young girls want to look like a 10 out of 10 and they feel like they don't look like the models, the Instagram models that they see and stuff. That's probably the driving factor.
exactly, it's completely messed up all of our brain chemistries, and especially it's hurting young women. So she was correct to point that out, but then she finished her thought, and she said that the reason for that is because of trans girls playing sports. And if the supposed moderate candidate is blaming teenage suicide on the fact that, um, 12 kids, speaking of Charlie Baker, when he was testifying in front of Congress on this issue, he was asked how many trans females are there in the NCAA, all of NCAA sports, all the divisions, all the sports. How many? The answer was 12.
Right. I mean,
Tens of
that's
thousands of students. There's 12. And that woman had the nerve to think that these people existing is the reason why young women are, so to co-opt teenage suicide to take a swipe at another vulnerable population is so fucking despicable. I logged online. I went to the Secretary of State's website, and I unenrolled from the Republican Party, right then and there. I was like, that was the last straw. I knew at that I knew at that point. I think I know. Yeah, Charlie Baker wasn't running again for governor. Um, Maybe he had already finished up his term, but there was nothing left, for me in the party. And actually, there's another UMass alum, a friend Zach, he used to live in my building. I finally said, I left the party, and he actually said something very kind. He says, actually, the party left you, and I thought, thank you, Zach. That's a nice thing to say. So, anyways, yeah, the last couple of elections, there's been nobody for me. Uh,
mm,
so the party has to do a lot of soul searching to find, someone of character and ideas. There's no ideas. There's no ideas anymore. It's just, you think mass deportations is going to fix the economy? JD Vance yesterday said on some show that um, it's these mass deportations is going to improve affordability. No, I mean, like in the far reaches, like of your brain, you might be able to make the argument, okay, less demand for goods by virtue of fewer people means you know greater supply and fewer and lower costs. But these are people who contribute to the economy at a greater rate per capita through entrepreneurship. They start more businesses. They are applying for jobs that run the economy. They're applying for jobs that are in low demand. When Ron DeSantis sent a plane full of people to Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, uh, there were a bunch of local journalists interviewing those people. And what did they want to be? The majority of the women, nurses. What do we have a shortage of in Massachusetts? Nurses, healthcare
Yes.
specialists. So, like, these are wildly valuable people to our economy. And it's just crazy to me that that's the biggest idea coming out of this administration is we're just going to kick a bunch of people out and we're going to spend so much blood and treasure to do it. Oh, and guess what? We can't find enough violent immigrants, so we're gonna get anybody we can. You know, quotas used to be racist enough, and now we're just going after brown people. While at the same time, our the other side of that idea is we're going to give amnesty to people in South Africa because
Oh,
white people are apparently facing a genocide, which is and comes from the farthest reaches of Mooneyville in conspiracy land. Um, so it's not the party of ideas anymore. It's the party of vibes and hate, and the vibes are ugly, and hate's not a policy. It's an emotion. So I'm out.
yeah, and it's a good decision to leave. The it's just like a boat that's on fire, and you're safe now.
So Will, what's your number one? So there's lots of issues right now. There's a lot of um, incendiary things happening. But like, what's your like policy issue that's big to you?
I think people paying their fair share in whether it's income tax or property tax, or and like I'm in favor of keeping a sales tax low, because like once again that's that makes it less of a burden on most people who are out shopping. But
Yeah.
and people outside of Massachusetts have called Massachusetts Taxachusetts, but in reality we have a 5% flat tax, flat income tax. And then I mean our sales tax is I believe it's 6.25%,
Yep.
which isn't outrageous. And then the property tax is looking.
It depends on your town.
Yeah, the states. It says according to AI, I could this could could be wrong, but according to AI, it says the state's average effective property tax rate is around 1.12%, but median annual tax bills can be high due to high property values. But
Yep.
still, only 1.12%. Like, you have a high value property, but you're only forking out 1.12% the to the state, and then the state, rewards us with public roads, public bridges, improved MBTA. And like I actually I was an intern in Senator Timilty's office the winter between my first and second semester of my senior year in college, and I actually remember Professor Reed,
Yeah, Laura
Laura
Reed.
Reed. Yep,
Yeah,
in
she
American
was
Foreign
great.
I had it for American Foreign Policy.
Uh-huh.
It's That was my second semester sophomore year, and then I did a one credit, internship with her, where
Hmm.
I took a journal of everything that happened at the state house, and then I wrote a paper about how we could solve the problem. And I said, the MBTA just needs to have like the funding, the tracks that need to be repaired, like you just got to put the money to repair them.
Yeah.
And like we're also like it like we the MBTA some of the cable cars have been upgraded in recent years. Like they used to joke about
Hmm.
how like the red line was slow as molasses. Like if you were taking it to work and you were late, the red line would make you even more late. But no, the majority of the cars now are upgraded. They have last I heard there's like one or two car of the slow cars are still going, but I mean the orange line got upgraded, and then
Hmm.
it's also great that the train service is now going down to Fall River and New Bedford. I mean,
Yeah.
for decades, Fall River and New Bedford have really been neglected compared to Boston and Worcester. And like I feel like in Fall River, actually, Trump actually won Fall River narrowly. He was the first Republican presidential candidate to win Fall River since Calvin Coolidge won it in 1924. So it's like people in
That's a
Fall
crazy
River,
factoid.
yeah. So, but people in Fall River, I mean, they're not like necessarily nativists. They just think that he could like somehow bring back a lot of jobs that have been lost overseas. I feel like Fall River and New Bedford have been hit a lot harder than Boston and Worcester, but now we got the train service going down there. So like
Yeah. It's
I
great.
and that's
It's a-
why I was a big advocate for the Fair Share Amendment that passed in 2022 with 52% of the vote. And they said, the people, the opponents said, like, millionaires were going to flee the state. We've actually, the number of millionaires have actually increased. And I was actually I student taught to get my history license. I taught it's called civics through current events. So we
Okay.
analyze civics events to teach the kids all about civics. And like my supervising practitioner, so the head of the history department at my school, he was actually against the initiative. He said that it would make it more difficult for New England sports teams to bring professional athletes to Massachusetts, but that's been proven false because this passed in 22, and that didn't stop the Celtics from signing Jaylen Brown to that 5-year biggest NBA contract in NBA history. And Jaylen Brown said he's like, I'm going to take some of this money and build a Black Wall Street on Boston. And it hasn't stopped the Patriots from re-signing Hunter Henry, and the Patriots brought in Milton Williams, and um, so they have another good cornerback who's been really good on defense. Like the Patriots have been able to bring in people, so
Yeah,
it,
absolutely. It's
it
if anything, it's inflationary.
right.
Um, because the draw, my company did a study. They're considering, do we want to relocate? Do we want to find a more tax-friendly state, or do we want to be closer to some of our other contracts? All sorts of things go into the calculus. And at the end of this, they said, you know what, the attraction to being in Boston, where the economy is dependable, strong and dependably strong, where it's dense with good transit, good recreation, and the best and brightest minds, the best universities. Um, the draw to be here. If you're a millionaire and you want to stay a millionaire and you want to become a bigger millionaire, like why wouldn't you not want to be here? This is where it's happening. Uh, so unless you want like to build a cheap manufacturing facility in like the desert in Arizona or somewhere else in the Sun Belt, I mean, fine, go for it. Uh, but you're also only getting taxed that surcharge on top of the income over the million. So people seem there's so many misconceptions about what it is. I am surprised though that I would have to go back and look at the process because we did have I guess a now moot or defunct constitutional provision um, that we not have a graduated tax rate. So I don't know how it was worded to get around that, but
Right, and it's only 4%, and it brings. I think Massachusetts. This could be a model for other states and for our nation. Like,
Yeah,
if we, and to be honest with you, like we're going to have to tax millionaires and billionaires if we really are going to pay down our national debt.
and the funny thing is, like, we're not talking about like extraordinary numbers. Like, I guess it depends on where you fall, or like how you get your income, and what tax bracket you're in. Um, because it's the example has been made a million times before. If I have $10 and you have 100, my $1 on a 10% tax means more to me than those $10 to you. And so when you're getting into certain, income levels, or if you're being taxed, who's the guy who does the late night show? Noah something, one of the late shows.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
no. We'll look that up.
is he South African?
Oh yeah, this Trevor Noah, the South
Trevor
African
Noah.
comedian and writer.
Trevor Noah did a really great monologue about how we tax the uber wealthy, your Elon Musk's. Is really funny. You should find this segment and cut me out and play this clip instead of listening to me talk. But he says, okay, so Elon Musk is worth $40 billion. And then Uncle Sam comes and says, I'm going to tax the $40 billion. But Elon Musk says, well, actually, I don't have it. It's really just all in stocks. So you can't tax me on that because it's not a thing that I actually have. And Uncle Sam says, okay, that's a great argument. I hear you. We're going to tax you on the actual salary you make, which is, $10 million. So obviously, wildly small amount compared to what he kind of has. But then Elon decides he wants to expand the business and break out into, energy storage, whatever. And so he goes to Wall Street and he says, "Hey, I want $50 billion to start up this crazy tunnel project here and whatever over there." And they say, okay, great. What's your collateral going to be? He says, I have, this $40 billion worth of stocks. But wait a minute, you just said that you don't actually have that. So how can you use that as collateral to get the money from the banks to do this other business venture? Which is it? Is it a thing you have and that you can use to get collateral? Or is it a thing you don't have? So you're not paying taxes. It can only do one or the other. And that goes back to the conversation about Mitt Romney. Like these loopholes have to be plugged. Because for me, like fairness be damned. There's so many things in the world that aren't fair. And if we're going to legislate on fairness, then I don't know if we're going to get anywhere. But brass tacks, baby. I think once people realize the dollars we're leaving on the table, and I think once people also realize that um, welfare queens is a myth, and that people like me get way more in benefits. I'm subsidized to a higher rate than a quote unquote welfare queen living in subsidized housing. I mean, the credits for the that I get for the mortgage and everything else is and if I had kids, the child tax credits and all that. Once you calculate everything that we give typically white middle class Americans, it far outweighs the poor black and brown families living in subsidized housing and using food stamps. So I think once people realize that it's not an us versus them zero sum game, the game of life, and that there's money being left on the table, maybe they'll start to see the rationale behind a surtax over a million or plugging the loopholes, especially this net value. The richest person in the world can't be paying a pittance. They got to be building. It's like the memes you see. You know, I wish we lived in a day when billionaires were still building libraries, not vanity projects to shoot themselves to the moon. So, and even Mitt said it. So I can get behind that.
Yeah, another very passionate issue of mine. And this was on the 2022. We had to affirm it at the ballot, and this is one of the few things that I was disappointed Charlie Baker vetoed, but the Mass Legislature overrode him to give undocumented people driver's licenses because once again they are here, they're contributing to the economy. Like as long as they have a you know I mean a clean driving record. I mean if they commit a bunch of traffic violations, then okay, then like anybody else in Mass, like there are penalties, including license suspensions. But the also though it's I like how Mass, like state law enforcement and local law enforcement, um, truly want like to live in a better community and like work for their community. It's not like
Mhm.
ICE where they have a quota, they have to round up as many undocumented people as possible. Like there's been times in the past where law enforcement has been predatory and has had quotas, which um, I've a lot of people have been very against. But law enforcement actually came out in 22 and said we support the bill to allow undocumented immigrants to get driver's licenses because it takes up like if you pull them over and they don't have a license, like then we have to deal with it. Then we have to like stand with them for like an hour to make sure they don't get behind that wheel of that car again. Like it takes time away from us being out, like, solving like real serious crime. And, predatory law enforcement would say, no, we don't want to give them driver's licenses because, when we pull them over, we want to be able to, put them in cuffs for not for, driving violation and stuff. But
Mhm.
law enforcement, most of the state, like the Massachusetts state and local law enforcement said, no, these people should have licenses because it would make our jobs a lot easier. And then 54 to 46, the Massachusetts voters affirmed that they should be able to have driver's
Mhm.
licenses. And if you look at the Dream Act, which we haven't been able to pass at the federal level, but I know Deval Patrick, I believe, did so got via executive action back in 2012. The Dream Act actually first passed all the way back down in Texas, all the way back in 2001. Rick Perry happily signed it into law. And there's a mix of blue, purple, and red states that have passed the Dream Act. But now
Mhm.
in Texas and in Florida, the governors there have signed bills to repeal the Dream Act in those states, which, like, the fact is, you want dreamers here. You want them to attend our colleges and universities because it could potentially lead to them having a very high paying job that will contribute to the economy. And like the U.S., if you have them deported, it's a brain drain because like
Mhm.
you want people from India and China to be here in the United States and to be working for NASA and U.S. health institutes rather because China and India already are the most populous nations in the world. Like we want if we're going to compete with them, we need to have people here.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I'm not familiar enough with the process of voter registration in Massachusetts. Um, it may be because I'm a citizen, I've just never thought about it. But when anytime you go to um, town hall or register or do any business with your town hall, you or I'm sorry, with the RMV, it can register you can get registered to vote. And so the concern he had was, will this automatically register people? And and I don't know the answer to that. And the part of that is, does the RMV have the capacity to verify other documentation for people come from out of the United States. Um, what does that look like? I don't know the answer to that. So it sounds to me those sounded like reasonable concerns. Um, are they insurmountable problems? Probably not. I'm sure it's something we could figure out. Um, so I guess I'm personally kind of ambivalent on that one. I see the concern. Does that outweigh, the supposed benefit? I don't know. I don't think, a few dozen people who may try to register to vote is going to necessarily sway the election. Although we've had some races in Massachusetts where the vote has been decided by a single vote. So maybe. But anyways, when it comes to dreamers, though, yeah, I completely agree that we should be. Um, actually, let me back up. More important than the driver's license thing, if we're talking fairness, I think we're doing a disservice by not addressing the bigger problem and cleaning up our pathway to citizenship and making that easier. Because it's you're kind of giving the opponents to immigration more fodder by approving the driver's license thing. You're kind of inciting them to dig in. So granted, it's not a state issue, but we've seen some examples of states in the past forming some pretty robust coalitions and passing regional bills and programs. One of them almost came to fruition, and then the pandemic gummed it up. But there was a thing called TCI, the Transportation. What's it called? Transportation. Sorry. Transportation Commerce Initiative, maybe something like that. Anyways, it was an agreement between like a half dozen states that they were going to change, how they assess fuel, carbon or fossil fuels at the point of entry to the United States. So I do think we're entering an era of federal dysfunction that's incentivizing states to form their own compacts. And obviously there's some things constitutionally they have no say over, but I'd like to see some smart people get creative with ways that they can influence then their representatives in Congress to push legislation that protects demographics like those who were covered in the DREAM Act. So I think we really got to get that fixed first. Otherwise, everything else is just a band-aid. We can't have people doing the right thing and it taking literal decades. And just getting extensions because it's so difficult, or there's not enough visas to give out. It's ridiculous. So I'd rather see that addressed first than pushing something that is. I mean, it's passed, and like I haven't seen many issues. So maybe they were for naught. But like, completely agree with taking care of these people who are here because their parents brought them here when they were young. Like, it's completely inhumane to target them and rip those families apart and not afford them the benefits that the kid down the street gets just because his parents were born or her parents were born here. So yeah, it's yeah, tax policy and immigration seem to be pretty big ones on the plate right now.
Yeah. So, are you still at the state house?
No, I left a long time ago.
Hmm.
I've been with Keolis, the MBTA's operating partner for the commuter rail, for about 9 years now, doing government affairs, public relations, and corporate communications. So yeah, my time at the State House thankfully came to an end. I kind of outlived my expiration date there. Uh,
Hmm.
did some campaign work a little bit in 2016, and then December of 2016 came to work for Keolis. And so actually, see it. What can you see? It's behind me. Um, my boss, when he left the business at the time, made this. So when I started, um, there was the the Secretary of Transportation said at the time, we're not going to extend Keolis's contract. So we're the implication being, even if they rebid, forget about it. But then flash forward to 2020, MBTA extended our contract. And then we've gotten multiple extensions since then. Now um, we're up for, well, we're not up, but we're rebidding the new contract. So, anyways, it was a long and winding road from 2016 to 2020. But I like to think, thanks in part to some good public affairs and government relations work, we were able to secure that extension. But of
Nice.
course, none of it's possible without the frontline employees and the operations fundamentals being there. So,
So there's a lot of I was an intern in Beacon Hill, and then I
uh-huh.
interned down in Capitol Hill in the winter and spring of 2013. There's a lot of I loved my time down in DC, but
Hmm.
I took it was a unpaid internship, but like I just went down there because I needed to get my foot in the door. I wanted to be in DC, like, and
Yeah,
I did security as a way to bring in some money. Plus, my parents really subsidized for me to be down there. But it was like a general rule down there, like you had to be an intern first before you got any paid position.
yeah,
But now it's like there's been a lot of push from AOC that, like she said, we're paying our interns at least 15 an hour. And I read that both Bernie Sanders and then Mike Crapo, who's a Republican senator from Idaho, so opposite ends of the spectrum, they pay their interns 15 an hour. So there was a push to get like at
yeah.
least a 15 an hour pay rate for interns, which I would agree to. I was fortunate because I came from a family that could afford to pay for my
Mhm.
housing and stuff down there, but a lot of lower income families wouldn't be able to send their kid to have an unpaid internship. So this would enable a lot more people who are having financial difficulties to be down there. And then I've also read that worker, like people, liaisons or like various roles like working in state rep or state senator's office, like they've been coming out recently and saying we deserve higher pay and better wages. So as someone who worked at the state house, do you think that did you feel that way at the time when you were there? And if so, what can we do to, because they deserve it, I think. So what can we
Yeah,
do to raise their wages?
they deserve something for sure. Um, they have to pay the minimum wage now in Massachusetts. I've always been supportive of the tipped wage, for hospitality, and for a teenage, summer wage, right? And I don't know if that scale extends to interns for summer interns, but it should be something, because like to the point you made, it's it's not it's we're not going to change society if the same strata of people are the only people who have the opportunity. The door is closed to the state house if it's an unpaid internship, and you're from a less fortunate part of town. Your family isn't well off, and that transcends race. That's just an economics thing. Um, so uh, you can have someone really bright and hardworking, but they can't afford to do it, um, because who can work 8 hours in a day, in some musty office in the state house, for $0. So you gotta eat lunch, right? You gotta get there. Like there's all this stuff. So yeah. totally supportive of that. Um, the uh, the state house salaries needs to be livable. It should be indexed to some metric, the same as the legislators' base pay is. I think that it's kind of silly that out of a house of 160 people, almost 100 of them have leadership positions, which comes with some form of a stipend. Not all stipends are created equal. Some are maybe a few $1,000s, others are many tens of thousands of dollars. But even so, no nobody gets into the legislature as an elected official with the intent to get rich. Like even if you're the best, even if you're the speaker, you're not you're not buying a ski house in Lake Tahoe on the speaker's salary. But as for the staff, that needs to be um, indexed to something reasonable. But I would also stop short of letting them unionize, um, because public sector unions, their power is there's no shareholder, there's no CEO that they um, have as a boogeyman to fight. Um, it's the taxpayer, it's the voters who have to foot that bill, and everyone deserves to earn overtime and to make a very good living. And like I'm not the arbiter of what a very good living is. Like people should be comfortable and be able to live in the community they serve. And people should be able to afford to live in Massachusetts if they're working in the state house. But I do worry that if we go the unionization route, we're going to absolutely explode the state house operating budget, the legislature's operating budget. So that's a bit of a middle ground answer.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable because I mean, like get them like a set wage that's like livable and to the point where they could have some disposable income, but then like having to get unions involved like that just kind of pushes it over the top. The
And it should be graduated, right? I mean, the
Yeah,
state should be affording some of the protection or some of the things that a union would fight for anyways. Because it's just a lot of this is good business sense. Um, as someone who's been part of the CBA, a collective bargaining agreement process with unions before, um, like it makes economic sense to pay your more tenured people more. They need that reward. They need that incentive. Because and so in theory, you get that over time in the legislature. If you're going to be a lifer, and you're going to work and be a committee uh, staff director or something, chief of staff. Um, or then maybe someday you'll be counsel to the Senate. Like you need the salary needs to be tied to something, as I said, whether it's indexed to some standard of living defined by the Department of Labor or a market, bench it to the market, whatever that may. I don't know who in the market you bench it to, but do the analysis every couple of years and then reconfigure it. But then you also need to, if people have a lot of tenure there, if you've been a legislative aide, and you picked a really crummy legislator who votes poorly, and or doesn't isn't favored by the speaker, that's not the fault of the staffer. And there are staffers who have been there for a long time, and they're getting the bottom rung pay. So they should be also, there should be scales, wage scales, for tenure as well. So there's lots of things that the legislature should be doing to compensate these people. To your on the partisan side, it made conventional wisdom sense to do away with intern pay in the early 2000s. That was done by Jane Swift, who was the acting governor. And very well intentioned because people see Beacon Hill as a place where folks waste money. But now looking back, I think we've learned enough about society and realized that we're actually putting ourselves at a disadvantage because now we're closing the door to some really bright people who could be getting their start. So penny wise, pound foolish, I guess. So yeah. This has been a fun conversation. I'm glad we had it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. We've already been an hour and a half.
Oh man, it's good. I could draw on and on. So what's the closing spiel?
Well, the prices. I was thinking a good way to close out is, I think one of the reasons why Trump won the election last year was because people they knew that he's not a good person, but like they thought he could get the price of eggs down back to what it was in 2019, but prices are only going up. It's I've heard a lot of different reasons for why prices are going up. I mean, there's have you heard the Federal Reserve argument? And then there's also we took the standard of we took the dollar off of the gold standard and put it on the petrodollar, but if you look at history though, I mean, prices have been, going up throughout history. I mean, back in the, if you look at a menu from 100 years ago, everything is so much cheaper than 50 years later, you see everything's a little bit more, a little higher, but still everything's still much cheaper than today. Even the 90s and 2000s, if you look at the prices of stuff, it's so much cheaper than what we have today. So it's everyone's talking how big of a problem inflation is and how big of a problem the increase in prices is, but it's really been going up for more than a century now. But I think it's not. I do support the idea. It's an interesting idea about the whole gold standard and stuff, but it's got to be pointed out that corporate profits are at an all-time high. And so in reality, what they should be, corporations could be charging a lot less for their goods. It's really, we have a problem with price gouging. We have a problem with, basically corporations try to, get these record high profits, and that's the only thing they care about. And that's why we're all having to pay so much more for groceries and for automobiles and everything. What can we do to bring prices down to an affordable level, not just to what they were in 2019, but really if we can get the economy of the 90s back when you could fill up a whole shopping cart for under $100.
So the book Abundance is obviously very popular right now. It's having a moment. And there's a line in the opening of the book that says something to the effect of, and it's by Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein, by the way. And they open it with something to the effect of, we are the richest society in history. Or I'm sorry, no, maybe I have that backwards. We're the poorest society in history with the most stuff. I think you're right. Corporate profits is a problem. There's no linchpin to any of these things, right? It's everything matters. Everything, especially in a globalized economy. There's always, if you a pull here, it's going to result in a pull here. It's a web. It's all connected. I think a huge piece of it is, you're right. All of our consumer goods are largely controlled by publicly traded companies who are beholden only to their shareholders. So that's why we're seeing shrinkflation. I've never Reese's peanut butter cups are my favorite candy. They're minuscule now, and that's the normal size. And it's so corporate profits is certainly a piece of it. I think consumers, it's really hard to change consumer behavior in big numbers, but I think that we're driving this as well by consuming a lot of really shitty products and lots of them. Ordering, you know, uh, 5 deliveries a day of useless shit from Amazon. Like w Conspicuous consumption is a huge piece of it. Um, we have to have some, regulations on competitiveness. We keep rubber stamping mergers. It's very rare for the FTC to actually deny now these massive corporate mergers. They never serve the consumer, never. And part of it is just the fact that um, we're not an industrial country anymore. We don't make things. We're a service-based economy. And then housing. I think all of housing is wildly expensive, but we're not building enough of it because we're zoning ourselves out of the ability to build it, which is a whole separate issue. But that's an inflationary problem. That's the reason why Massachusetts is one of the most expensive states to live in. So we don't have enough housing. So what happens? The housing costs a lot of money. What happens to the housing costs a lot of money? Everything then costs more money because if you want to live here, you got to pay to live here. Um, and all of that, when they bundle it all together, you get a term called cost disease. Why are things going up? Because they're going up. Um, and I don't, but to your first part of this question, I think that is huge frustration with the electorate. Um, but I have a really uglier, more cynical view of what happened in 2024. And maybe it's a symptom of cost disease that kind of turned people to this dark place. But I sincerely think that the majority of people who voted for Trump voted that way because they're afraid someone else is getting something and bettering their station in life, whether it be a house, a job, go to a school, car, the ability to buy goods, a vacation, whatever it is, they seem to think that it means that there's less of it to go around and that it's going to somehow impact them, even though that's not true. So that's a really discouraging view. And I really am trying to wrap my head around it. But even people I care about a lot, friends I've talked to, they articulate their reasons for their vote. It comes down to um, other people, other people getting things like citizenship, or in a brown person going to their school, God forbid. Uh, and it's really ugly. And I think there's lots of reasons why people think this way. Um, and it's not, I don't think it's their fault. I think it goes back to social media. It goes back to bitterness about their ability to purchase things and anxieties about, what the future holds. So at the end of the day, it's almost you can't fault these people like you can't fault a child. Because that's just kind of how they've been conditioned based on the media they consume, and their lived experiences. Which now, to bring it full circle, leads me to the point that you kind of have to have patience and pity on these people because they don't know what they don't know, and even though that's an ugly um, view of theirs, if true. I'm speculating with that. I can't tell what's in pe people's hearts of hearts. But if that is true, that they're threatened by other people's success, um, then you have to have patience still and recognize that there's, whether it's real or imagined, there's something in their lives that are making them feel that way. And I think we got to figure out how to get in between that so they can correct course. So, but yeah, cost disease sucks. Even the Congressional Budget Office has a hard time defining it, figuring out how to stanch it. So that's my answer.
Yes, and that was a very complex but very well thought out and articulate.
It was a little here, it was a little bit there, it was a little bit over here. That's the thing. That's the thing about politics and the economy. Everything matters, and so it's hard to stick with one clean cookie cutter topic because all of it, it's a web. One pull here, you feel it over here. So it all matters, and there's no silver bullet that's going to fix our problems. And to like we said at the top of the call, it's going to take everybody. It's going to take the Mr. Rogers method. All the helpers doing their thing in their area of expertise, which is great for me because I am a jack of all trades but master of none. So I'll just sit back and watch the experts do their thing.
Sounds like a good plan.
All
Great.
right, brother.
Well, thank you for coming on tonight. This was a great discussion. I look forward to releasing this, and I'm going to say, in the description, I'm going to say that political civility is still alive, and this discussion tonight really proves it.
It is. It is for sure, for certain. Um, all right. I'm gonna go watch the season premiere of Traders. But it was good talking to you, brother.
Yeah, nice talking to you as well.
I
All
like
right.
the shirt, by the way.
Wow, thank you.
All right,
Yeah,
this is fun. Good
definitely.
chatting, and I'm looking forward to watching the episode.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I'll let you know when it's released.
Sounds good. Thanks, Will.
All right, this concludes our most recent episode of the Yeti's Den. And until next time, take care.
Take care.